A millionaire falls in love with an abandoned woman who, homeless and desperate, was sleeping with her children by the side of the road, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The late autumn wind whistled through the gaps in the concrete barriers lining Highway 95 just outside of Boston. Madeline Fitzgerald pulled the worn fleece blanket tighter around her sleeping sons, Caleb and Oliver, their 8-year-old faces, peaceful despite the harsh circumstances that had brought them here. The boys had curled up against each other for warmth, their matching dark curls, so like their father's, tousled by the breeze. Maddie's fingers traced the outline of her wedding ring, now hanging on a thin chain around her neck. 6 months had passed since Ethan's accident, but the weight of his absence still pressed against her chest with each breath. The insurance money had run out faster than she'd imagined possible, and the mortgage payments had quickly become overwhelming. One missed payment had led to another, and then another, until the house they'd called home for the past decade had slipped through her fingers like water. Now, their world had shrunk to this small patch of grass between the highway barrier and a cluster of trees. Their possessions fit into 2 backpacks, changes of clothes, a few treasured books, and the boys' favorite stuffed animals. During the day, Maddie sold bouquets of wildflowers she gathered from nearby fields, along with small crafts she made from found materials, painted rocks, woven grass bracelets, and origami figures she'd learned to fold from an old library book. The sound of passing cars had become a constant companion, each whoosh of tires on asphalt a reminder of how quickly life could change. Some days, Maddie caught glimpses of families in minivans, briefcase-toting executives in luxury sedans, all racing toward their destinations without a second glance at the small family huddled by the roadside. She didn't blame them. 6 months ago, she might have done the same. A particularly loud truck rumbled past, causing Oliver to stir in his sleep. Maddie gentled her hand through his hair until he settled again. Despite everything, her boys had shown remarkable resilience. They never complained about missing their video games or their comfortable beds. Instead, they'd thrown themselves into helping her with the flower business, their small hands carefully arranging blooms and crafting paper flowers when real ones were scarce. During the day, they attended the local public school. Maddie had insisted on maintaining their education despite their circumstances. She used the address of a local shelter for registration purposes, and the boys carried their backpacks with quiet dignity, never letting on to their classmates about where they really slept at night. Their teachers had noticed their changed circumstances, of course, but Maddie's fierce pride and the boys' continued academic excellence had earned them a measure of respectful distance. The night air grew colder, and Maddie pulled out their emergency blanket, a mylar sheet that crinkled loudly but trapped precious heat. She'd learned to layer it between regular blankets to muffle the sound. As she arranged their makeshift bed, her eyes caught on the small notebook she kept in her jacket pocket. Inside were careful calculations, daily earnings, expenses, and the growing list of job applications she'd submitted. The numbers never quite added up to enough for an apartment deposit, but she refused to let go of hope. Tomorrow would be another day of selling flowers, another day of searching for work between sales, another day of making sure her boys had enough to eat before she thought about her own hunger. But tonight, as the traffic thinned and the stars emerged above the city's glow, Maddie allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about Ethan, about the life they'd planned together, about the future that had shattered like glass on pavement. But mostly, she thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days stretching ahead. Somewhere in that future was a way forward. She had to believe that, if not for herself, then for the 2 sleeping boys who depended on her for everything. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Maddie made a wish, not for wealth or comfort, but for strength. Strength to face another day, strength to keep her boys safe and loved, strength to find their way back to stability. As she finally lay down beside her sons, their warm bodies instinctively curling toward her, Maddie whispered a quiet promise to the night sky. "We'll make it through this. Somehow, we'll make it through." Grant Mitchell drummed his fingers against the leather-wrapped steering wheel of his Mercedes S-Class, watching the traffic crawl forward on Highway 95. Another delayed flight had forced him to drive back from New York instead of flying, and now Boston's infamous rush hour was eating into his evening. His phone buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes, probably Clara, wondering why he wasn't home yet for their scheduled dinner with the Huntingtons. The thought of another evening of superficial conversation about yacht clubs and summer homes made his jaw clench. At 42, Grant had achieved everything society deemed important. CEO of Mitchell Enterprises by 35, a mansion in Beacon Hill, a wife who graced charity gala photos with practiced elegance. Yet lately, the weight of his success felt more like chains than wings. The traffic inched forward, and Grant's attention drifted to the roadside. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, a beauty entirely wasted on the frustrated commuters around him. That's when he first saw them, a woman and two young boys, arranging what looked like handmade crafts on a small folding table. Something about the scene made him look twice. The woman moved with a grace that seemed at odds with her surroundings, her movements precise and purposeful as she adjusted displays of flowers and small trinkets. The boys worked alongside her with unusual focus for children their age, carefully organizing items while occasionally glancing at passing cars with hopeful expressions. Grant found himself pulling over before he'd made a conscious decision to stop. Clara would be furious. He was already late, and now he was parking on the shoulder of a highway to... What? He wasn't sure himself. He just knew he couldn't drive. Embarrassed, couldn't add his indifference to what must be an endless stream of averted eyes. As he approached their small setup, the details became clearer, and each one landed like a punch to his gut. The carefully mended clothing, the school books peeking out of worn backpacks, the neat array of handcrafted items that spoke of hours of patient work. This wasn't a casual roadside venture. This was survival. "Would you like to buy some flowers, sir?" The woman's voice was clear and steady, with no trace of the desperation her situation might warrant. Her green eyes met his directly, and Grant found himself struck by their intensity. This was someone who had known better days, but hadn't let hardship dim her spirit. "Yes, What would you recommend?" The words felt inadequate, but they were all he could manage. One of the boys, they had to be twins, Grant realized, stepped forward with a small bouquet of wildflowers mixed with what looked like origami flowers. "These are our sunset specials," he explained with surprising professionalism. "Mom makes the paper flowers when we can't find enough real ones." "They're beautiful," Grant said, and he meant it. The arrangement showed genuine artistic talent, with colors that mimicked the sky above them. "I'll take 2. He pulled out his wallet, deliberately avoiding looking at the modest price tags. Instead, he extracted several $100 bills, far too much for flowers, but it felt like far too little for what he was witnessing. The woman started to protest, but Grant held up a hand. "Please, they're worth it." He paused, then added, "I'm Grant." "Madeline," she replied after a moment's hesitation, "but most people call me Maddie. These are my sons, Caleb and Oliver." The boys gave small waves, and Grant noticed how they stood slightly closer to their mother, protective despite their young age. He saw something in their stance that reminded him of himself at that age, after his own father had left. That too early understanding of life's harsh realities. "Do you set up here often?" The question came out before he could stop himself, and he saw Maddie's expression close slightly. "We do what we need to," she answered simply, her dignity a palpable force. Grant nodded, understanding the boundary. She was drawing. He accepted the flowers, their paper and wild bloom mixture, somehow more beautiful than any expensive arrangement he'd ever bought. "Thank you," he said, trying to convey more than just appreciation for the flowers. As he walked back to his car, Grant's phone buzzed again. Clara's name flashed on the screen, but he let it go to voicemail. His mind was too full of what he'd just witnessed. The strength in Maddie's eyes, the quiet resilience of her boys, the profound wrongness of their situation. Sliding back into his car's leather interior, Grant placed the flowers carefully on the passenger seat. The contrast between their simple beauty and his car's opulent surroundings seemed to underscore everything that felt increasingly hollow about his life. As he pulled back into traffic, he found himself already planning to take this route again tomorrow, though he couldn't have explained why. What he couldn't know, was that this chance encounter would crack open something in him that all his careful corporate armor had been designed to protect, something that would force him to question every choice that had led him to this moment and every choice he would make from here on out. Over the next 2 weeks, Grant found himself taking the longer route home, the one that passed by Maddie and her sons. Each time he'd stop to buy flowers or crafts, gradually learning more about their lives through brief conversations. He learned that Caleb loved mathematics and could calculate complex sums in his head, while Oliver had an artist's eye, responsible for many of their most creative arrangements. He noticed how Maddie never complained about their circumstances, but her eyes would soften with pride when speaking about her son's achievements at school. Today, dark clouds threatened rain, and Grant pulled over earlier than usual, worried about their lack of shelter. He stepped out of his car carrying a large umbrella and a bag of takeout from an upscale restaurant near his office. "Mr. Mitchell," Oliver called out, waving. The boy had started sketching a new design for paper flowers, and Grant noticed how carefully he preserved his limited supply of paper. "I thought you might like some dinner," Grant said, approaching their small setup. "And please, I've told you, it's just Grant." Maddie looked up from where she was helping Caleb with his homework. "That's very kind, but we couldn't possibly—" "I ordered too much," Grant lied smoothly. "It would just go to waste otherwise." He'd actually chosen the restaurant specifically because he knew their portions were generous and the food would keep well if stored properly. A distant rumble of thunder punctuated his words, and Grant watched as Maddie's resistance wavered. She glanced at her sons, then at the darkening sky. "Thank you," she finally said, accepting the bag with grace. "Would you like to join us?" The invitation surprised him. It was the first time she'd suggested he stay. "I'd like that," he said, settling down on the grass beside them. He opened the umbrella, positioning it to shelter their small group from the first drops of rain. As they shared the meal, Grant noticed how Maddie made sure her sons ate first, taking only small portions for herself. The boys' table manners were impeccable, evidence of their mother's continued emphasis on dignity despite their circumstances. "How was school today?" Grant asked, genuinely interested. He'd learned that focusing on normal, everyday topics helped ease the awkwardness of their unusual situation. "We had a science fair," Caleb explained, his eyes lighting up. "I did a project about wind patterns, used some of the paper flowers to show how air moves differently around different shapes." "He won first place," Maddie added softly, her pride evident. "The teacher said it was college-level analysis." Grant watched as Caleb blushed at the praise. "That's impressive. Have you ever thought about engineering? My company has some excellent internship programs." He trailed off, realizing he was getting ahead of himself. But Maddie didn't seem offended by the suggestion. Instead, she looked at her son thoughtfully. "Caleb's always been fascinated by how things work. Before, She paused, taking a breath. His father used to let him take apart old electronics, figure out what made them tick. It was the first time she'd mentioned her late husband, and Grant felt the weight of her trust. He noticed how both boys grew, quiet at the reference to their father, their expressions a mixture of sadness and something harder to read, perhaps worry for their mother. "Mum's really good at fixing things too," Oliver piped up, clearly trying to shift the conversation to happier territory. "She fixed Mrs. Chen's sewing machine last week." "Mrs. Chen?" Grant asked, noting how Maddie's cheeks colored slightly at her son's praise. "She owns the laundromat where we wash our clothes," Maddie explained. "She lets us use the machines during off hours in exchange for small repairs. I used to do maintenance work before." The rain was falling steadily now, drumming against the umbrella above them. Grant watched as Maddie efficiently packed away their crafts and flowers, protecting them from the weather with practiced movements. The boys helped without being asked, their teamwork evidence of a well-established routine. "You know," Grant said carefully, "my company's maintenance department is actually understaffed right now. They're looking for someone with hands-on experience." Maddie's hands stilled for a moment. "I appreciate the thought, but I can't leave the boys alone all day. And most places won't hire someone without a permanent address." Grant wanted to argue, to point out that these were solvable problems, but he recognized the pride in her voice. She wasn't looking for easy solutions or handouts. Still, he couldn't help but notice how her fingers trembled slightly as she folded their last blanket, how the approaching winter had added new lines of worry to her face. As he helped them secure their belongings against the strengthening storm, Grant made a mental note to look into his company's policies regarding flexible working hours and employee housing assistance. He wouldn't mention it to Maddie yet, but he could at least lay the groundwork. "Drive safely," Maddie said as he prepared to leave, her genuine concern for his well-being touching something deep inside him. Here she was, facing unimaginable hardship, yet still caring about others. "You'll be okay in this weather?" he asked, reluctant to leave them exposed to the elements. "We have our spots," she assured him, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "The boys know where to go when it gets bad." Grant nodded, understanding she wouldn't reveal more. As he drove away, his rearview mirror showed Maddie and her sons gathering their few possessions, ready to seek whatever shelter they'd found. The image stayed with him all the way home, where Clara waited with reproachful comments about missed dinner reservations and social obligations. Later that night, lying awake in his king-sized bed, Grant couldn't stop thinking about Maddie and her boys, huddled somewhere in the rain. The contrast between his life and theirs felt like a physical ache in his chest. Something would have to change. He just wasn't sure what or how. The Mitchell mansion's marble foyer echoed with the sharp click of Clara's heels as she paced, her designer dress still perfectly pressed despite the late hour. Grant sat in his study, the door open just enough to hear her increasingly agitated phone conversation. "No, Catherine, he missed another board dinner, said he was stuck in traffic again." Clara's voice dripped with skepticism. "I don't know what's gotten into him lately. This isn't like Grant at all." Grant rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar tension headache building. She was right. This wasn't like him. The Grant Mitchell of 3 months ago would never have missed a dinner with the hospital board, wouldn't have disappointed Clara or risked important business connections. But that Grant hadn't known Maddie existed. He glanced down at his desk, where several folders lay open. Employee housing initiatives from other major corporations, flexible working hour policies, on-site childcare programs. He'd been researching them all. His corporate counsel had already drafted preliminary proposals for implementing similar programs at Mitchell Enterprises. It wasn't just about Maddie anymore. Her situation had opened his eyes to a whole population of struggling workers he'd never truly seen before. The sound of Clara's heels approached his study. He quickly closed the folders as she appeared in the doorway, her perfectly maintained facade showing cracks of genuine concern. "Grant, darling, we need to talk." She perched on the edge of an antique leather chair, her posture rigid. "Everyone's noticed the change in you. The Huntingtons asked if you were ill. The Brabants wondered if there were problems with the company." "The company's fine, Clara. Better than fine. Our Q3 profits are up 15%. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked their manicured gardens. Somewhere across the city, Maddie and her boys were probably huddled under their blankets trying to stay warm. "This isn't about profits." Clara's voice softened slightly. "You're distracted, distant. You barely touch your food at dinner when you're actually home for it. And these mysterious delays every evening." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "If there's someone else—" "It's not what you think," Grant interrupted, though his heart rate quickened. Technically, there wasn't anything inappropriate between him and Maddie. He'd never so much as touched her hand, but he couldn't deny that she occupied his thoughts more than any woman had in years, maybe ever. "Then what is it?" Clara stood, moving closer. "We used to understand each other, Grant. Our arrangement worked perfectly. You built your empire. I maintained our social position. We each had our role." Grant turned to look at his wife of 15 years. Clara was still beautiful, her blonde hair expertly styled, her features arranged in an expression of practiced concern. But standing there, he suddenly realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her truly smile. Not the social smile she wore like another piece of expensive jewelry, but a real, spontaneous expression of joy. "Maybe that's the problem," he said quietly. "It was an arrangement. Is that all you want from life, Clara? Arrangements and appearances?" She recoiled slightly, genuine emotion finally breaking through her polished surface. "What else is there? We have everything we worked for. The right house, the right friends, the right influence. We're respected, envied. But are we happy?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 15 years of unspoken compromises. Clara's face hardened, her vulnerability disappearing behind familiar walls. "Happiness is for people who can't afford better," she said coldly. "We chose this life together, Grant. If you're having some sort of midlife crisis, deal with it. But don't throw away everything we've built on some romantic notion of happiness." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The Ashworth's gala is next weekend. I expect you to be there, and to be yourself again. Whatever's distracting you, whatever's making you question things, let it go. We have responsibilities." After she left, Grant remained at the window for a long time. The gardens below were illuminated by carefully placed landscape lighting, every flower and shrub arranged for maximum visual impact. Like everything in his life with Clara, it was beautiful but artificial. He thought of Maddie's wildflower bouquets, of the genuine warmth in her smile when her sons made her proud, of the quiet dignity with which she faced each day's challenges. There was more authenticity in her small roadside table than in all the carefully curated spaces of his mansion. His phone buzzed, a text from his head of HR confirming a meeting tomorrow about the new initiatives he'd proposed. Grant typed a quick response, then opened his weather app. A cold front was moving. Before he could stop himself, he was ordering several heavy-duty sleeping bags and winter coats to be delivered to his office tomorrow. Clara's words echoed in his mind. Let it go. But as he sat back down at his desk and reopened the folders, Grant knew he was past the point of letting anything go. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maddie's face, saw the quiet strength in her green eyes, saw how she made beauty out of whatever life gave her. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and began writing, outlining more proposals for company changes. If Clara thought this was a midlife crisis, so be it. But Grant was beginning to suspect it was something else entirely, an awakening, a recognition that all his success meant nothing if it couldn't be used to make a real difference in people's lives. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the empty house. Somewhere in the city, Maddie was watching over her sleeping sons, and here, in his study, Grant Mitchell was finally choosing the kind of man he wanted to be. Maddie sat in the public library, taking advantage of their free internet access to check her email and job applications. The sleeping bags and winter coats that had appeared mysteriously at their spot 2 days ago lay carefully folded in her backpack. She knew they were from Grant. The quality alone spoke of his resources, but he hadn't mentioned them during his subsequent visits, and she hadn't brought them up. "Mom, look at this," Caleb whispered excitedly, pointing to his laptop screen. The library provided computer access for homework, and her sons always made the most of it. "They're offering free coding classes for kids at the community center." Maddie leaned over to look, her heart catching at her son's enthusiasm. The program looked excellent, exactly the kind of opportunity Caleb needed. But the schedule showed it ran until 6 p.m., well after school hours. Their current spot was too far to make the timing work, and the winter darkness would make the walk dangerous. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said carefully. "Let me think about how we could make it work." Oliver looked up from his own homework, his intuitive understanding of her hesitation showing in his eyes. "Maybe Mr. Mitchell could help," he suggested quietly. "He knows about computers and stuff." Maddie felt her cheeks warm at the mention of Grant's name. She'd been trying not to think about him too much, about the way his visits had become the bright spots in their difficult days, about how his eyes held genuine interest when he asked about their lives, or how he never made them feel like charity cases despite his obvious wealth. "We can't keep depending on Mr. Mitchell's kindness," she reminded her sons, though the words felt hollow even to her. The truth was, his kindness had already made their lives significantly easier. The warm sleeping bags meant the boys no longer shivered through the night. The new coats had earned them approving nods from their teachers, instead of worried glances. "He doesn't mind helping," Caleb insisted. "He said we're his favorite part of the day." Maddie's heart skipped at this revelation. "When did he say that?" "Yesterday, when you were getting more paper for the flowers. He said coming to see us makes him remember what's important." She turned back to her email, trying to hide her flustered reaction. A notification caught her eye, a response to one of her job applications. Her breath caught as she opened it. "Dear Ms. Fitzgerald, thank you for your application to Mitchell Enterprises." Her hands trembled slightly as she read the email inviting her for an interview. The position was in facilities maintenance, exactly the kind of work she'd done before. The listed salary was generous, and the benefits included childcare assistance. It seemed almost too perfect. She thought about confronting Grant about it during his next visit, about telling him she didn't need his help finding work. But wasn't that pride talking? The same pride that had initially made her hesitate to accept the sleeping bags, even as her boys shivered in the cold. A memory surfaced. Ethan's voice, one of their last conversations. "Promise me you'll always put the boys first, Mads, above everything else, above pride, above what anyone thinks. They're what matters." She clicked the reply button and began typing her acceptance of the interview time. As she did, she realized something else was shifting inside her, something that felt dangerously like hope. Not just hope for financial stability, but for something more, something she'd thought she'd never feel again after Ethan. The way Grant looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, it stirred feelings she'd carefully locked away after losing Ethan. She knew he was married. She'd seen the ring on his finger, heard the occasional mentions of his wife. And yet, there was an undeniable connection between them, an understanding that went beyond simple charity or friendship. "Mom?" Oliver's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Can we get books before we go? The librarian said we can keep them for 3 weeks. Maddie smiled, pushing aside her complicated feelings about Grant. Of course, sweetheart. Choose whatever you'd like. As she watched her sons browse the shelves, their faces lit with the simple joy of discovering new stories, Maddie allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where they had a real home again, where the boys could pursue their interests without constant worry about basic survival. The image was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it felt increasingly possible, terrifying because she wasn't sure she could bear losing everything again if it didn't work out. The library was closing soon, and they needed to get back to their spot before dark. As they packed up their belongings, Maddie caught a glimpse of herself in the window's reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow. Still cautious, still wounded, but with a spark of something new in her eyes. She thought about the job interview, about Grant's quiet support, about her boy's resilience. Perhaps it was time to let go of some of her protective walls, to accept that sometimes help could come without strings attached, and that sometimes people could surprise you with their genuine goodness. As they walked back to their spot, the boys chattering excitedly about their new books, Maddie found herself looking forward to Grant's next visit, not because of what he might bring or offer, but simply because of who he was, someone who had looked past their circumstances and seen them as people worth knowing. The sun was setting as they reached their familiar place by the highway, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of Grant's first visit. Tomorrow, she decided, she would thank him properly for the sleeping bags and coats, not because etiquette demanded it, but because he deserved to know that his kindness had made a real difference in their lives. And maybe, just maybe, she would allow herself to acknowledge the growing warmth in her heart when she thought of him, not to act on it, but simply to recognize that her heart was still capable of feeling something she'd thought was lost forever. The Mitchell Enterprises lobby gleamed with polished marble and chrome, making Maddie acutely conscious of her second-hand interview outfit from the donation center. She'd spent an hour that morning at the shelter's bathroom, making sure every detail was perfect. Hair neatly styled, clothes pressed as best she could manage, the tiny scuff on her borrowed shoes carefully colored in with a marker. The boys were at school, their teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, having agreed to let them stay late in the library until Maddie could pick them up. The interview wasn't supposed to be long, but even a short absence from her usual spot made her anxiety spike. Yet here she was, following a sleek-suited receptionist toward the elevator, trying to look like she belonged. Ms. Fitzgerald, a professionally dressed woman, greeted her on the executive floor. "I'm Sarah Chen from HR. Thank you for coming in today." The interview room was intimidating in its understated luxury, all clean lines and city views. Maddie sat straight-backed in the visitor's chair, hands clasped to hide their slight trembling. She'd prepared for this, had practiced answers to standard interview questions during quiet night hours, but nothing had prepared her for what happened next. The door opened and Grant Mitchell walked in. His step faltered slightly when he saw her, surprise flickering across his features before his professional mask settled into place. "Ms. Fitzgerald," he said formally, though she could hear the undercurrent of emotion in his voice. "Thank you for applying to Mitchell Enterprises." Maddie's mind raced. She'd known it was his company, of course, but she'd never expected him to be involved in a maintenance position interview. The careful distance they'd maintained at their roadside meetings suddenly collapsed, worlds colliding in this sterile corporate setting. Sarah Chen began the interview with standard questions about experience and qualifications. Maddie answered automatically, her awareness split between maintaining professional composure and hyper-conscious of Grant's presence as he sat silently observing. "Your technical knowledge is impressive," Sarah noted, reviewing Maddie's previous work history, "but there's a significant gap in your employment record." "Yes," Maddie acknowledged, her voice steady despite her racing heart. After my husband's passing, I faced some challenging circumstances. However, during that time, I've continued to use my skills, doing repair work at local businesses, helping at shelters when possible. I've never stopped learning or working, even if it wasn't in an official capacity. She felt Grant shift in his chair, but didn't dare look at him. She knew he was thinking of their conversations about her repair work, about the sewing machine, at the laundromat, about all the small ways she'd tried to keep her skills sharp while surviving. And childcare arrangements? Sarah asked. The position requires some evening hours. I've researched several after-school programs, Maddie began, but Grant interrupted. We're actually implementing an on-site childcare program, he said, his tone carefully professional. It's a new initiative launching next month. Hours will extend to cover evening shifts. Sarah looked surprised. Clearly, this was news to her. Maddie finally allowed herself to look directly at Grant, finding his eyes already on her. There was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Determination, maybe, or something. Deeper she wasn't ready to name. The interview continued, but the dynamic had shifted. When Maddie demonstrated her technical knowledge, answering complex questions about building systems and maintenance procedures, she saw pride flash across Grant's face. When she spoke about her commitment to quality work, about her belief in treating every task as important no matter how small, she watched him nod, almost imperceptibly. As the interview wound down, Sarah excused herself to get some additional forms, leaving Maddie alone with Grant for the first time in this strange, new context. You didn't tell me you were applying, he said softly. I didn't want you to feel obligated, she replied, equally quiet. And I needed, to do this on my own merits. You have. His voice was firm. Every answer you gave today proved that. But Maddie, he leaned forward slightly, his professional demeanor cracking. Why didn't you tell me things were so difficult? About the laundromat repairs, about all the ways you've been struggling to make ends meet. Because when you looked at me, you saw me, she whispered. Not my circumstances. Do you know how rare that is? The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but Sarah returned with the forms, breaking the tension. As Maddie left the building 30 minutes later, clutching an official offer letter with a starting date for the following Monday, her emotions were in turmoil. The salary would be enough for an apartment deposit. The benefits would cover the boys' medical needs. The childcare program would solve so many logistical challenges, but it was the look in Grant's eyes that occupied her thoughts as she hurried to pick up her sons. The way he'd watched her demonstrate her competence, the pride and something else. Something that made her heart race, even as her conscience whispered warnings about wedding rings and social distances too vast to bridge. She found the boys waiting at the school library, their faces lighting up when they saw her. How did it go? Caleb asked eagerly. I got the job, she told them, gathering them close. Things are going to change for us. Good change? Oliver asked, his young face serious. Maddie thought about Grant, about the complexity of feelings she couldn't allow herself to explore, about the chance to rebuild their lives, about all the ways their worlds were shifting. Yes, she said finally, good change, but we'll face it together like we always do. As they walked back to their spot one last time, they could move into a small apartment by the end of the week. The offer letter made that possible. Maddie realized that while she'd gone to the interview hoping to change their circumstances, she might have set in motion changes far more profound than she'd intended. The small two-bedroom apartment wasn't much by most standards, but to Maddie and her boys, it felt like a palace. After 2 days of cleaning and settling in, helped by their few possessions and some basic furniture from a local charity, they were finally home. The boys shared the smaller bedroom, their twin beds separated by a second-hand desk where they could do their homework. Maddie took the larger room, though she'd given the boys the dresser, keeping her own clothes in a simple cardboard wardrobe. "Mom," Caleb called from the kitchen, "the sink is doing that thing again." Maddie smiled, grabbing her tools. This was their third minor repair since moving in. The apartment had been cheap for a reason, but she didn't mind. Every fixed leak and tightened hinge made the place feel more their own. As she worked under the sink, she heard Oliver entertaining himself by practicing a presentation for his art class. Her sons had adapted to their new circumstances with remarkable resilience, though she sometimes caught them checking the corners of rooms, as if making sure the walls were still there. The doorbell rang, making them all jump slightly. They weren't used to having a door, let alone a doorbell. Maddie emerged from under the sink, wiping her hands on a rag. "I'll get it," both boys called simultaneously, then laughed at their synchronization. Through the peephole, Maddie saw Grant standing in the hallway, looking somewhat out of place in his expensive suit. Her heart did that now familiar skip, even as her mind reminded her of all the reasons she shouldn't feel this way. She opened the door, conscious of her work clothes and disheveled hair. "Grant, is everything okay at work?" She'd been at Mitchell Enterprises for 5 days now, keeping her head down and working twice as hard as anyone else in the maintenance department. "Everything's fine," he assured her quickly. "I was in the neighborhood and thought—" He trailed off, seemingly realizing how unlikely it was that he'd just happened to be in this modest part of town. "I wanted to see how you were settling in." The boys bounded over, their initial shyness around Grant long gone. "Mr. Mitchell, want to see our room? We have real beds now." Grant's face softened as he looked at them. "I'd like that very much. If your mother doesn't mind." Maddie hesitated only briefly before stepping aside to let him in. She watched as her sons proudly gave him a tour of their small home, showing off Oliver's artwork on the walls and Caleb's organized homework station. Grant paid attention to every detail, asking questions and showing genuine interest in their excitement. "And Mom fixed everything herself," Oliver declared proudly. "The shower, the window, and now the sink." "Speaking of which," Maddie said, "I should finish with that sink before dinner." "May I?" Grant asked, rolling up his sleeves. "I did some maintenance work in college, believe it or not. Helped pay for my first year before the scholarships came through." Maddie blinked in surprise. It was hard to imagine Grant Mitchell, CEO of a multinational corporation, doing repair work, but there he was, getting down on the floor beside her to peer under the sink. They worked together in comfortable silence, hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools back and forth. The boys watched with interest, Caleb taking notes on the repair process while Oliver sketched the scene. "There," Grant said finally, testing the pipes. "Should hold now. The building super really should replace these gaskets, though. They're not up to code." "I'll add it to my list of things to mention to him," Maddie said, impressed despite herself. "Thank you." They stood up, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the small kitchen. Grant's sleeve had rolled down, revealing a tan line where his wedding ring usually sat. Maddie noticed its absence immediately, questions flooding, her mind that she had no right to ask. "Mr. Mitchell," Caleb interrupted the moment, "could you help me with something? It's about the coding class." "Of course," Grant replied, following Caleb to the boys' room while Maddie started preparing dinner. A simple but nutritious meal, now that they had a proper kitchen and steady income. She could hear them talking, Grant's deep voice mixing with Caleb's excited chatter. Oliver had settled at the kitchen table with his sketchbook, occasionally looking up to study her expression. "You like him," Oliver said suddenly, his perceptiveness catching her off guard. "Mr. Mitchell has been very kind to us," she answered carefully. "That's not what I meant," her son persisted. "You look at him the way you used to look at Dad, in the old pictures. Maddie's hands stilled on the vegetable she was chopping. "Oliver, sweetheart, it's not that simple. Mr. Mitchell is our employer, and he's not wearing his ring anymore." Oliver finished, then returned to his drawing as if he hadn't just turned his mother's world sideways. Before Maddie could process this observation, Grant and Caleb returned, discussing the possibilities of setting up a small coding workspace in the apartment. Grant's face was animated, his corporate mask completely gone as he engaged with her son's enthusiasm. "I should go," he said finally, checking his watch. "But I meant to ask, there's a company picnic this weekend. Very casual, families welcome. I know it's short notice, but we'll be there," Maddie found herself saying, surprised by her own quick response. "Thank you for thinking of us." At the door, Grant paused. "Maddie, He seemed to struggle with what to say next. "I'm glad you're all settling in well." After he left, Maddie leaned against the closed door, her mind spinning. Everything was changing so fast, the apartment, the job, and now these feelings she couldn't quite control. She touched her wedding ring, still hanging on its chain around her neck, and wondered what Ethan would think of all this. "Mom?" Caleb's voice brought her back to the present. "Can we have spaghetti tonight?" She smiled, grateful for her son's simple request, grounding her in the moment. "Of course, sweetheart. Want to help me with the sauce?" As they worked together in their new kitchen, Maddie tried not to think about Grant's missing wedding ring, or the way he'd looked at her while they fixed the sink, or how natural he seemed with her boys. She had a good job now, a roof over their heads, and her sons were happy. That should be enough. But as she caught her reflection in the window, she realized she was smiling in a way she hadn't in years. Maybe Oliver was right. Maybe she did look at Grant the way she'd once looked at Ethan. The thought should have frightened her, but somehow it didn't. Instead, it felt like another new beginning, as full of possibility as their little apartment with its squeaky floors and temperamental sink. The company picnic sprawled across Franklin Park's rolling lawns with clusters of red and white tents, dotting the landscape. Maddie adjusted the collar of her simple sundress, another find from the donation center, but one that actually fit well, as she watched her sons run toward the children's activity area. Ms. Fitzgerald, Sarah Chen from HR, waved her over to a group of employees. "So glad you could make it. Your boys are adorable." Maddie joined them, grateful for Sarah's friendly demeanor. Her first week at work had been busy enough that she hadn't had much time to socialize, focusing instead on proving herself through the quality of her work. Now, watching her co-workers with their families, she felt a tentative sense of belonging. "They're setting up the three-legged race," announced Pete from maintenance, his own kids bouncing excitedly beside him. "Anyone brave enough to join?" "Mom! Mom!" Caleb came running back. "They need more people for the race. Can we?" Maddie laughed, letting her son pull her toward the starting line. All around them, parents were being tied to their children with colorful ribbons. She caught glimpses of Oliver watching from the sidelines, happily sketching the scene. "Remember," she told Caleb as they were tied together. "Slow and steady wins the race," he finished, grinning up at her. "Just like the tortoise." They lined up with the other pairs, Maddie acutely aware of the mix of employees from every level of the company. A senior VP was tied to his daughter on their left, while the cafeteria manager and his son stood on their right. In this moment, titles didn't matter. They were all just families having fun. The race started with cheerful chaos, pairs stumbling and laughing as they tried to coordinate their movements. Maddie and Caleb found their rhythm quickly, years of working together in difficult circumstances translating into an almost instinctive synchronization. They were neck and neck with the cafeteria manager when Maddie heard a familiar voice cut through the crowd's cheers. Grant had arrived at the picnic, and he wasn't alone. A striking blonde woman in an outfit that looked more suited to a country club than a park stood beside him, her expression a mixture of disdain and boredom. Clara Mitchell's presence hit Maddie like a physical shock. She stumbled, throwing off her rhythm with Caleb. They recovered quickly, but the moment cost them their lead. They finished third, both laughing despite the loss. "That was amazing, Mom." Caleb hugged her as they were untied. "Can we get ice cream now?" "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the knot in her stomach. "Why don't you get Oliver and meet me at the ice cream cart?" As her sons headed off together, Maddie became aware of the subtle shift in atmosphere around her. Other employees were noticing the CEO's arrival and his wife's obvious displeasure at being there. Clara's voice carried across the lawn, sharp, with annoyance. "Really, Grant, I don't see why this was necessary. The country club's charity luncheon is today, and you know how important those connections are." "These people are important too, Clara." Grant's response was quiet but firm. "They're the backbone of our company." Maddie busied herself helping to clear away the race ribbons, trying to appear invisible. But she could feel Grant's awareness of her presence, just as she was hyper-conscious of his. "Mrs. Mitchell," Sarah Chen approached the couple with professional enthusiasm. "We're so honored you could join us. Would you like a tour of the activities?" Clara's smile was perfectly practiced, but didn't reach her eyes. "Actually, I was just leaving. Grant can represent us both, I'm sure." She turned to her husband, speaking low but not quite low enough. "Try not to stay too long. The Bradburys are expecting us for dinner." Maddie watched from the corner of her eye as Clara air-kissed Grant's cheek and departed, her heels somehow immaculate despite the park's grass. The contrast between Clara's exit and the happy families around them couldn't have been starker. "Mom, we got you strawberry," Oliver called out, returning with Caleb and 3 ice cream cones. They settled at a picnic table, the boys chattering about the games they wanted to try next. "Mind if I join you?" Grant stood beside their table, his tie loosened and jacket discarded in the summer heat. He looked more relaxed than Maddie had ever seen him at work, though there was tension around his eyes. "Please," she said while her sons eagerly made room for him. "Mr. Mitchell, did you see us in the race?" Caleb asked. "We almost won." "I caught the end of it," Grant smiled. "You two were very impressive." They fell into easy conversation, the boys sharing stories about their new school friends and their settling into the apartment. Grant listened intently, asking questions that showed he remembered every detail they'd ever shared with him. Maddie found herself relaxing despite her earlier discomfort at seeing Clara. This version of Grant, casual, engaged, genuine, felt right in a way his corporate persona never quite did. She caught him watching her several times, his expression soft in a way that made her heart race. "Caleb, Oliver!" Pete's kids ran up to their table. "They're starting the scavenger hunt. Want to join our team?" The boys looked at Maddie for permission. "Go ahead," she smiled. "Have fun." Left alone with Grant, Maddie felt the atmosphere shift. The happy sounds of the picnic continued around them, but they might as well have been in their own bubble. "I'm sorry about Clara," Grant said finally. "She's not good with events like this." "You don't have to explain," Maddie replied, softly. "She's your wife." "In name only, for a long time now." Grant's hands clenched slightly on the table. "We're separating, actually. Have been for weeks, though she's refusing to make it public." Maddie's heart stuttered. She thought of Oliver noticing Grant's missing ring, of all the moments of connection they'd shared. "Grant, I know this isn't the place," he continued quickly, "and I know there are complications, the company, our different worlds, your loss. But Maddie, I need you to know that what I feel for you and your boys, it's—" "Mom! Mr. Mitchell!" Caleb came running back. "We need more people for our team. Will you help us?" Maddie met Grant's eyes, seeing in them everything he'd been about to say. "We'd love to," she told her son, standing up. "Right, Grant. Right," he smiled, following her lead. "Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at scavenger hunts." As they joined the children's team, Maddie felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever was developing between her and Grant, it would need time, space, and careful handling. But watching him help her sons decipher the hunt clues, seeing the natural way they all fit together, she allowed herself to hope. The afternoon sun painted everything in golden light, turning this simple company picnic into something that felt like a preview of possibilities. For the first time since losing Ethan, Maddie felt truly ready to open her heart to those possibilities, whatever they might bring. Monday morning at Mitchell Enterprises felt different. Maddie could sense it as soon as she walked through the lobby, her maintenance uniform crisp and professional, but somehow feeling like inadequate armor. Whispers followed her to the service elevator, fragments of conversation that made her stomach tighten. Saw them at the picnic. CEO's wife left early, and playing happy family with her kids. She kept her head high, focusing on her work orders for the day. The first task was fixing the HVAC system in the executive wing. Exactly where she didn't want to be, but she had a job to do. The Yazabizo elevator opened directly into the plush corridor of executive offices. Sarah Chen intercepted her before she could reach the maintenance panel. "Maddie!" Sarah's voice was low and concerned. "I thought you should know. Clara Mitchell is here. She's been in Grant's office all morning." Maddie's hands tightened on her tool belt. "Thank you for the warning, but I'm just here to do a job." "Of course," Sarah hesitated. "It's just there are rumors about you and Mr. Mitchell." "People will always talk," Maddie said carefully. "What matters is the quality of my work." She moved past Sarah to the access panel, but not before catching sight of Clara through Grant's office windows. The CEO's wife was pacing, her elegant outfit a stark contrast to Maddie's work clothes. Grant sat at his desk, his posture rigid. Focusing on the HVAC system helped. This at least made sense. The flow of air, the interaction of components, the clear path from problem to solution. She lost herself in the work, trying to ignore the muffled sounds of argument from the office behind her. "You're making a fool of yourself, Grant." Clara's voice suddenly carried clearly through the ventilation system Maddie was working on. "A maintenance worker? With children? What will the board say?" "The board cares about results, Clara. Our profits are up 30% since implementing the new worker support programs. Don't pretend this is about business. I saw how you looked at her at that ridiculous picnic. Do you think I'm blind?" Maddie's cheeks burned. She wanted to move away, to stop hearing this, but she was in the middle of a crucial repair. Moving now would risk damaging the system. "Maybe I am a fool." Grant's voice was tired but firm. "A fool for spending 15 years in a marriage of convenience. A fool for caring more about appearances than actual happiness. But I'm done, Clara. We've been done for months. The separation agreement is ready. All it needs is your signature. And then what? You'll run off with your charity case? Play daddy to her fatherless boys? Don't." Grant's voice turned sharp. "Don't you dare speak about them that way. Maddie has more strength and dignity than anyone I've ever met. And those boys, they're extraordinary children who've faced more challenges than you could imagine." Maddie's hands trembled as she finished the repair. She needed to get out of there, away from this conversation she was never meant to hear. But as she packed her tools, Clara's next words froze her in place. "I've had our lawyers draw up some interesting paperwork." Clara's voice turned silky. "About company policies regarding relationships between executives and employees, about the proper channels for hiring, about how certain maintenance positions were filled recently." "Are you threatening her job?" Grant's chair scraped back. "Clara, think carefully about your next move. You're talking about interfering with a qualified employee who's done nothing wrong. Wrong is relative, darling. What would the press say about the CEO of Mitchell Enterprises falling for a homeless woman he hired? About him spending time alone with her underage children? I can make this very messy, Grant. Maddie had heard enough. She closed the panel with shaking hands and quickly gathered her tools. As she turned to leave, she found herself face to face with Clara Mitchell, who had finally emerged from Grant's office. Clara's perfect features arranged themselves into a cold smile. "Oh, how awkward. Were you eavesdropping, dear? Though I suppose old habits die hard." Before Maddie could respond, Grant appeared in the doorway. "Clara, that's enough." His eyes met Maddie's, filled with apology and something deeper that made her heart ache. "I've finished the repairs, Mr. Mitchell," Maddie said formally, proud of how steady she kept her voice. "The system should work properly now." She turned away, walking quickly toward the elevator. Behind her, she could hear Grant call her name, could hear Clara's sharp laugh, could hear the whispers starting again among the executive staff who had witnessed the scene. In the privacy of the service elevator, Maddie leaned against the wall and took deep breaths. Everything was unraveling. The job she'd worked so hard to prove herself worthy of, the stability she'd finally found for her boys, the tentative feelings she'd allowed herself to explore, all of it threatened because she'd dared to hope for something more. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grant. "Please let me fix this. She can't hurt you or your position here." But Maddie knew better. She'd learned the hard way that when powerful people were determined to cause harm, they usually succeeded. She thought of her boys, finally settled in their new home, finally feeling secure. She couldn't risk their stability for whatever was growing between her and Grant. As the elevator reached the maintenance floor, Maddie straightened her uniform and wiped her eyes. She had more repairs scheduled, more work to do. She would focus on that, would keep her head down, would protect what mattered most, her children's well-being. But as she moved through her day, she couldn't quite silence the echo of Grant's words in her heart. "More strength and dignity than anyone I've ever met." She touched the wedding ring still hanging around her neck, wondering what Ethan would tell her to do. Somehow, she thought he would understand this impossible situation. The choice between protecting what you have and reaching for what your heart wants. The answer, she realized, might require more strength than she knew she possessed. Caleb and Oliver sat at their small kitchen table, homework spread before them, but their usual focus was missing. Maddie could feel their worried glances as she prepared dinner, her movements mechanical as her mind raced through options. The past week had been a careful dance of avoidance at work. She'd rearranged her maintenance schedule to stay away from the executive floor, taken her breaks at odd hours, and kept her head down. Grant had respected her unspoken request for space, though she'd found small notes in her work orders. "Please talk to me and let me help," each one making her heart twist. "Mom," Oliver's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Are we going to have to leave again?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She turned from the stove to find both boys watching her, their young faces carrying too much understanding of adult complexities. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "You have the same look you had before," Caleb explained, "when we lost the house. Like you're trying to figure something out but can't." Maddie sat down at the table, dinner temporarily forgotten. "I promised you both we'd never be in that situation again, and I meant it. We have savings now, and I'm good at my job." "But something's wrong," Oliver persisted. "You don't smile anymore, and Mr. Mitchell hasn't visited." "It's complicated, boys." Maddie struggled to find the right words. "Sometimes adults have to make hard choices to protect the people they love." A knock at the door interrupted them. Maddie's heart jumped, only to settle when she saw Sarah Chen through the peephole. "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced," Sarah said when Maddie opened the door, "but this couldn't wait." She held up a thick manila envelope. "You need to see these." The boys automatically gathered their homework and retreated to their room, another habit learned from harder times, giving adults space for difficult conversations. Sarah spread documents across the kitchen table. "Clara Mitchell's been busy?" She's drafted complaints to the board about preferential hiring, about Grant's leadership being compromised by personal interests. She's even trying to suggest there's something inappropriate about his interactions with your sons. Maddie's hands clenched. She's trying to force me out. Yes, but look at these. Sarah pulled out another set of papers. Employee reviews from your department head. Maintenance logs showing a 30% improvement in response times since you started. Cost savings from your preventive maintenance program. Clara can make insinuations, but she can't argue with results. Why are you showing me this? Sarah's expression softened. Because you need to know you have allies. The HR department stands behind your hiring. It was based entirely on merit. The maintenance department values you, even the board. Well, let's just say Clara's complaints aren't finding the receptive audience she expected. But she could still make things difficult for the company, for Grant. Grant Mitchell is the most successful CEO this company has ever had, Sarah said firmly. And contrary to what Clara thinks, the board knows his recent initiatives, the ones inspired by meeting you and your boys, have improved both profits and employee retention. A new knock at the door made them both jump. This time, when Maddie looked through the peephole, her heart didn't settle. Grant stood in the hallway, his tie loosened, his expression determined. Maddie, please, 5 minutes. Sarah quickly gathered the documents. Think about what I said, she told Maddie. And remember, running away isn't always the same as protecting people. As Sarah left, Grant entered, the small apartment suddenly feeling even smaller with his presence. From the boys' room came the sound of muffled giggling. They were definitely eavesdropping. You've been avoiding me, Grant said softly. I've been being sensible, Maddie corrected. Your wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife, he interrupted. I filed the papers today. Regardless of her threats, regardless of everything else, that marriage was over long ago. Maddie moved to the kitchen window, needing space to think. The street below was quiet. Normal families in normal homes, living normal lives. I can't be the reason your life falls apart. You're the reason I finally saw how empty my life was. Grant stepped closer, though he carefully didn't touch her. Maddie, watching you with your boys, seeing how you face every challenge with grace and determination, it woke something in me, something I thought I'd lost in all the years of chasing success. And what happens when Clara follows through on her threats, when the press starts digging? Your reputation, do you know what my reputation is now? His voice carried a hint of pride. I'm the CEO who implemented comprehensive worker support programs, who brought in on-site childcare and flexible scheduling, who proved that taking care of employees improves the bottom line. And it all started because I saw a woman and 2 young boys by the side of the road showing more dignity in hardship than most show in prosperity. Despite herself, Maddie turned to face him. Grant, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he said quickly. I know you're still healing, still finding your footing. I know the boys have to come first. They should come first. I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere, that Clara's threats don't frighten me, that whatever you decide, your job is secure because you earned it. The sound of small feet in the hallway made them both look up. Caleb and Oliver stood in their doorway, attempting and failing to look like they hadn't been listening. We like Mr. Mitchell, Mom, Caleb said simply. And he makes you smile, Oliver added. Real smiles, like in the old pictures. Maddie felt tears prick her eyes. Boys, I think Dad would want you to be happy, Caleb continued, his young face serious. He always said that's what mattered most. Grant's breath caught audibly at the boy's words. Maddie looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what she'd been trying to ignore, the way he fit into their lives, the genuine care he showed for her sons, the man who'd stopped his car that first day, not out of pity, but out of recognition, of something that called to his soul. The timer on the stove beeped, startling them all. "Dinner's ready," Maddie said softly. Then, gathering all her courage, she added, "Would you like to stay?" The weekend arrived with the crisp clarity of early autumn. Maddie watched from a park bench as Grant helped the boys fly a kite. A simple Saturday afternoon activity that somehow felt monumental. In the 2 weeks since that dinner in their apartment, they'd been taking careful steps forward, finding their way through this new territory. "Higher," Oliver called out, his face lit with joy as the kite caught an updraft. Grant adjusted the string with surprising skill, showing Caleb how to feel the wind's direction. Maddie's fingers went to her neck, finding empty air where her wedding ring had hung. The chain now rested in a small jewelry box in her dresser, not forgotten, never forgotten, but no longer needed as a shield against the future. "Mom, come. Try!" Caleb waved her over, holding out the kite string. As she joined them, Grant's hand brushed hers in passing, a small touch that sent warmth through her entire body. These moments had been growing more frequent. Shared glances, brief touches, the electricity of possibility. "I was thinking," Grant said as they watched the kite dance against the blue sky. The boys mentioned wanting to join that robotics club at the community center. "They've been talking about nothing else," Maddie smiled. The center was closer to their apartment than the school, making the timing workable with her schedule. "The thing is," he continued carefully, "I used to do competitive robotics in college. I could help out, if they'd like that." Maddie looked at him, understanding what he was really offering. Not just help with robotics, but a gentle step into a larger role in their lives. "I think they'd love that." The boys had moved a short distance away, working together to untangle a second kite. Maddie took advantage of the moment of privacy. "Clara signed the papers," she said quietly. "Sarah told me this morning." Grant's expression shifted, relief, hope, and something deeper. "Yes, it's being handled quietly, but it's done. She's accepting the settlement we offered." "And the complaints against me?" "Withdrawn, though they never had any merit. Your work record speaks for itself." He turned to face her fully. "Maddie, I know we've been taking things slowly, and I respect that, but I want you to know I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am about how I feel about you, about all of you." A memory surfaced, Ethan's voice from years ago. "Love isn't a finite resource, Mads. The heart grows to hold what it needs to hold." She'd been worried then about having twins, about whether she could love 2 babies equally. Now, his words took on new meaning. "The boys' school has a parent-teacher conference next week," she said, making a decision. Would you like to come with me?" Grant's face lit up with understanding of what she was really asking. Before he could respond, a commotion from the boys drew their attention. "We did it!" Oliver called out. They had not only untangled the second kite, but modified it, adding streamers in a pattern that caught the light beautifully. "That's incredible engineering," Grant praised, examining their work. "How did you figure out the balance point?" As the boys excitedly explained their process, Maddie watched the 3 of them together. Grant listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he took their ideas seriously. He'd been doing that from the beginning, she realized, seeing them as people to be respected, not problems to be solved. A gust of wind caught both kites, lifting them high. Caleb grabbed for his string, stumbling slightly, and Grant steadied, him with natural protectiveness. Oliver leaned against Maddie's side, his artist's eye following the dance of colors against the sky. "Mom," he whispered, "everything's different now, isn't it?" She hugged him close, watching as Grant showed Caleb a new kite-flying technique. "Different doesn't always mean scary," she said softly. "Sometimes it just means better. Like when we got the apartment. Exactly like that." She kissed the top of his head. "Some changes look scary at first, but lead us exactly where we need to be." The afternoon light turned golden, painting, everything in warm hues. Grant looked over at them, his expression so full of love it almost took Maddie's breath away. She'd seen that look before, in old photos of Ethan, in memories of happier times. But instead of feeling guilty, she felt grateful. Grateful that her heart had remembered how to recognize love. Grateful that her boys had helped her find the courage to accept it. "One more flight before dinner?" Grant asked, and both boys nodded eagerly. "Maddie?" She stepped forward, letting him show her how to hold the kite string, his hands gentle over hers. Above them, the kites soared and dipped in a complicated dance, separate but somehow connected, like their lives weaving together into something new and beautiful. "I'd love to come to the parent-teacher conference," Grant said quietly, "just for her, and to everything else if you'll let me." Maddie leaned back slightly, feeling the solid strength of him behind her, watching her sons laugh in the autumn sunlight. "I think," she said, "we'd like that very much." The parent-teacher conference room felt smaller than Maddie remembered from her previous visit. Maybe it was Grant's presence beside her that changed the space, or maybe it was the weight of significance this meeting carried. Ms. Thompson, who taught both boys, smiled warmly as they settled into the chairs across from her desk. "Mr. Mitchell, I wasn't expecting," she began, then collected herself professionally. "It's wonderful to have you join us." "Grant, please," he said, his casual tone helping to ease the awkwardness. "I'm here to support Maddie and learn more about the boys' progress." Ms. Thompson's expression softened as she looked between them. "Well, I have to say, the changes in Caleb and Oliver over the past months have been remarkable. Their academic work was always strong, but now there's a confidence, a security that wasn't there before." She pulled out 2 folders, opening them to reveal artwork and mathematics assignments. "Oliver's artistic abilities are flourishing. His pieces are being featured in the school art show next month, and Caleb's engineering project about wind resistance won him a spot in the district science fair." "The kite project?" Grant asked, leaning forward with interest. "He's been working on the calculations for weeks." Ms. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes, exactly. He mentioned getting help with the advanced mathematics." She paused delicately. "Grant's been volunteering with their robotics club," Maddie explained. "Both boys have really taken to it. I can tell," Ms. Thompson smiled. "They talk about their club projects almost as much as they talk about their new home. The stability has made such a difference in their emotional well-being." The meeting continued, full of positive reports and future plans. As they left the school, the setting sun painted the brick buildings in warm colors. Grant's hand found Maddie's, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I know that wasn't easy," he said softly, "having me there, making it official in a way." "Actually," Maddie smiled, "it felt right. The boys adore you, and you've been such a positive influence in their lives." They walked toward Grant's car, but he stopped before opening the door. "About that, I've been thinking. The lease on your apartment is coming up for renewal next month." Maddie's heart skipped. "Yes? I know my house is in a different school district, but I've been looking at properties in this area. Something with a yard, room for a proper workshop for the boys' projects." He took a deep breath. "Something we could make into a home. Together." A year ago, standing in front of a mansion would have intimidated Maddie. But looking at Grant, now, she didn't see the wealthy CEO or the man from a different social world. She saw someone who had learned to value the same things she did: love, family, genuine connection. "Are you asking us to move in with you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider building a new life with me, all of us together." His free hand cupped her cheek. "I love you, Maddie. I love your strength, your dignity, your heart. I love how you've raised those boys, how you never let circumstances break your spirit. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you and the boys what family can be." Tears pricked at Maddie's eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd shed during their harder times. The boys will want to know if they can build a robotics lab in the garage. Grant's face lit up with hope. Is that a yes? It's a, let's talk to them together. She squeezed his hand. But Grant, I love you too. He pulled her close, kissing her with all the tenderness and passion that had been building between them. When they parted, both slightly breathless, the world seemed fuller of possibility than ever. We should pick up the boys from the community center, Maddie said, though she didn't move from his embrace. They'll want to hear about Miss Thompson's report. And about the house. Grant's eyes crinkled with amusement. And about the house, she agreed. Though I suspect they've been hoping for something like this. Oliver's been drawing pictures of all of us together for weeks. As they drove to collect the boys, Maddie thought about all the turns her life had taken. The loss that had seemed unbearable, the struggles that had tested her limits, the unexpected kindness that had changed everything. She thought about Ethan, about how he would have wanted this for them. Not just security and comfort, but love and family and joy. The community center came into view, and through the window she could see Caleb and Oliver waiting, their faces lighting up at the sight of Grant's car. They were no longer the scared boys who had huddled under blankets by the highway. They were growing, thriving, ready for this next chapter, just like their mother. The house wasn't as large as Grant's mansion, but it felt more like a home the moment they walked through the door. 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen that opened onto a family room, and most importantly, a converted garage that would become the boys' workshop. Maddie watched as Caleb and Oliver ran from room to room, their excitement filling the empty spaces with life. "This room has the best light for drawing," Oliver called from upstairs. "Mom, Grant, the garage already has workbenches." Caleb's voice echoed from the back of the house. Grant stood beside Maddie in the entryway, his arm around her waist. "What do you think?" She leaned into him, taking in the warm wooden floors, the large windows, the way the afternoon light created patterns on the walls. "It's perfect, but are you sure about downsizing so dramatically? Your other house was never really a home," he finished. This is where we'll build something real." The sound of footsteps thundering down the stairs interrupted them. The boys appeared, slightly breathless with excitement. "Can we really live here?" Oliver asked, his eyes wide. "If that's what everyone wants," Grant said carefully, "it would be our home, all of us together." The boys exchanged one of their twin telepathy looks that Maddie had learned to recognize. Then Caleb spoke up. "We have something to show you. You first." They led the adults to the car, where they pulled out a carefully wrapped package from their backpacks. Inside was a framed collection, Oliver's drawings of their family through the seasons, from their first meetings by the highway to the recent day at the park with the kites. "We've been working on it," Oliver explained, "for when we found the right home." Maddie's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the progression of images. The first showed her and the boys huddled under their blankets, but even then Oliver had captured a sense of dignity in their poses. The next showed Grant stopping to buy flowers, his expression warm even in pencil strokes. Each subsequent drawing showed their family growing closer, shared meals, homework sessions, the robotics club, flying kites. The final image, however, was different. It showed all 4 of them, but in the sky above, Oliver had drawn another figure watching over them with a gentle smile. "Ethan. Is this okay?" Oliver asked nervously. "We wanted Dad to be part of our new family too, not in a sad way, but in a watching over us way," Caleb finished. Grant's hand found Maddie's, squeezing gently. "I think it's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your dad will always be part of who you are, part of this family's story." Maddie pulled her sons close, breathing in the scent of their hair, marveling at their wisdom and sensitivity. "I love it, and I love you both so much." "We love you too," Caleb said. "And we love Grant. Even though he's terrible at video games," Oliver added with a grin. "Hey," Grant protested, laughing. "I'm learning." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning where furniture would go, what colors to paint the rooms, how to set up the workshop. The boys had detailed ideas for their spaces, and Grant listened to every suggestion with genuine interest, offering his own thoughts while respecting their vision. As evening approached, they ordered pizza and sat on the floor of what would become their family room, sharing their hopes for this new chapter. The boys talked about school projects they could work on in the garage, about having friends over, about finally having a real home again. "There's one more thing," Grant said when they'd finished eating. He pulled out a small box from his jacket pocket. "This isn't a ring. Not yet. That will come when we're all ready. But it is a promise." Inside the box was a delicate gold compass pendant. "Because you helped me find my true north," he explained softly. "You and the boys showed me what really matters in life." Maddie touched the pendant with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful." "Look at the back," Oliver urged, clearly in on the surprise. Engraved on the reverse were 4 sets of initials and a date. The day Grant had first stopped by the highway to buy flowers. "The day our family really began," Grant said, "even if we didn't know it then." As he fastened the compass around her neck, replacing the empty space where her wedding ring had hung, Maddie felt the rightness of this moment. The pendant didn't erase the past, nothing could or should, but it pointed toward their future, just as a compass always showed the way home. "So," Grant smiled at all of them, "shall we start planning our move?" "Can we paint my room blue?" Oliver asked immediately. "Like the sky in the kite picture?" "Can we get more tools for the workshop?" Caleb chimed in. Maddie watched them begin excitedly planning details, her hand resting on the compass pendant. Through the windows, she could see the sun setting on their new neighborhood. Once, she had watched similar sunsets from beside a highway, trying to keep hope alive for her children's sake. Now hope wasn't something she had to work at. It lived and breathed in this room, in these people who had become her second chance at happiness. A year ago, she would never have believed this possible. But life, she had learned, had a way of bringing you exactly where you needed to be, even if the path there wasn't what you expected. 6 months later, the house had transformed from an empty shell into a vibrant home. Family photos lined the walls, professional portraits mixed with candid snapshots of their life together. The garage workshop buzzed with activity most afternoons, the boys' robotics projects growing more ambitious under Grant's guidance. Oliver had converted one corner into an art studio, his drawings now spanning entire walls in a celebration of their family's journey. On this particular Saturday morning, Maddie stood in the kitchen, watching through the window as Grant helped the boys set up tables in the backyard. It was Caleb and Oliver's 9th birthday, and for the first time since losing Ethan, they were having a real party. Their school friends would be arriving soon, along with colleagues from Mitchell Enterprises, who had become extended family over the past year. "The decorations are up," Oliver announced, bounding into the kitchen. His face was flushed with excitement. "And we finished setting up the robotics demonstration," Caleb added, following his brother. "Grant helped us make it perfect." Maddie smiled at their enthusiasm. "Everything looks wonderful. Why don't you both go get changed? Your friends will be here soon." As the boys thundered upstairs, Grant came in, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Penny for your thoughts?" She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "Just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, I could barely afford to get them birthday cards. And now they're having the robotics and art-themed party of their dreams," Grant chuckled, "complete with a cake shaped like a circuit board." "They're so happy," Maddie said softly. Sometimes I watch them sleeping and they look so peaceful, so secure. No more checking the corners of rooms, no more hiding their circumstances from friends. Grant turned her gently to face him. You did that, Maddie. You kept them going through the hardest times, kept their spirits intact, their hearts open. We did it together, she corrected, touching the compass pendant she still wore, from the moment you stopped your car that day. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the first guests. Soon, the house was filled with the happy chaos of a children's party. Caleb and Oliver moved confidently among their friends, demonstrating their latest inventions, sharing their art, being simply kids, enjoying their birthday. Sarah Chen arrived with her family, giving Maddie a warm hug. The boys look so happy, she said, and you're glowing. Maddie touched her still flat stomach, sharing a secret smile with Sarah. They hadn't told the boys yet about the baby. That news would come after the party, a special family moment. The afternoon passed in a blur of games, demonstrations, and celebration. The circuit board cake was a huge hit, especially when the LED candles actually lit up, one of Grant's special contributions. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Maddie found herself in a quiet moment with her sons. Did you have a good birthday? She asked, smoothing Oliver's perpetually messy hair. The best, Caleb said firmly. Even better than, Oliver hesitated, then continued, than the ones with Dad. Maddie's heart squeezed, but not painfully. Different, she said honestly. But your father would be so proud of you both, of how you've grown, how you've opened your hearts to love. Like you did, Caleb said with that startling insight he sometimes showed. Grant joined them, carrying the last of the party debris. Everything okay here? The boys exchanged one of their looks, then Oliver spoke. We've been thinking, would it be okay if we started calling you Dad? Not to replace our first dad, but because you're our dad too, Caleb finished. Grant set down what he was carrying, his eyes suspiciously bright. I would be honored, he said, voice rough with emotion. But only if you're both absolutely sure. Instead of answering, the boys threw themselves into his arms. Maddie watched, her own eyes filling with tears, as Grant held them close, whispering something that made them both laugh through their tears. Later that night, after the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, Maddie and Grant stood in their backyard. The tables were cleared away, but paper lanterns still twinkled in the trees, casting a gentle glow. Ready to tell them about the baby tomorrow? Grant asked, his hand resting protectively over her stomach. Yes, Maddie smiled. They're going to be amazing big brothers. Just like their amazing sons. Grant kissed her softly. I love you, Maddie Mitchell. She looked up at him. This man who had changed their lives not through grand gestures or charity, but through the simple act of seeing them, loving them, choosing them. I love you too. Above them, stars twinkled in the clear night sky. Somewhere, Maddie liked to think, Ethan was watching over them, happy that his family had found joy again. The compass pendant around her neck caught the light of the lanterns, reminding her that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginning, led exactly where they were meant to. She thought of the babies growing inside her, twins according to the latest ultrasound, as if the universe had a sense of poetry, and smiled. Their family's story wasn't ending. It was continuing to unfold in beautiful, unexpected ways. Let's go inside, she said softly. Home. And as they walked hand in hand into their warm, love-filled house, Maddie knew that all of this, was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of past sorrows, but the presence of present joys. Not the erasure of old memories, but the creation of new ones. Not the end of one story, but the beginning of another, even better chapter. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like